Hello friends, Jim Lynn here, welcome back to my workshop. The workshop's actually annoying me at the moment, and this is just one example. You see, both roofs have lots of little leaks, so I've had to cover both in polytunnel sheet for protection. Now the leaks are due to my bad design, and I do need to rebuild both roofs properly, but that's a summer job, so this solution, hopefully temporary, should at least get me through the winter. But the main problem is that whenever I come in here these days, I feel friction. It feels cluttered, it feels uninviting, it feels unusable. And I know why, and it's simple. It's all this stuff covering the floor. Now all this has been here since the spring when I had to deal with that mould disaster. And there's also friction when I want to do something to make something, because the tools I want are not as easily accessible as I would like. For instance, there's a lot packed away in here. Right, I know I'll feel better if I can just free up some floor space. So first of all, there's an easy win here. These two machines will be going back to the house soon, so that'll free up some options. And these grey boxes and the three large black boxes are mobile, so they're less of a priority. These other boxes, they're not mobile and they're not practical at all, so that's where I'm going to start. These cardboard boxes, for instance, have got all my books in them, and my books have been in here for years. And it's not ideal at all because storing them like this makes finding any one book particularly difficult. You can see that the cardboard is prone to absorbing moisture and sustaining water damage, and when that happens, the boxes don't stack well. And also, it makes them much more difficult to get a grip if I need to move them. So, obviously, I need a bookcase. But although the bookcase is the obvious solution, is it the best solution? Well, first of all, yes, the books will be visible and accessible, but unless it has transparent doors or any kind of doors, it'll offer no protection from workshop dust or even dampness. And unless it's mobile, I risk a return of the mould issue underneath and behind. And also, I've got neither the time nor the inclination to make one, so that means buying one, and that could be costly as I've got a lot of books. So then, what about shelves? Well, yes, visible, yes, accessible, and yes, off the floor, but still the same issue with protection against dirt. And in addition to all of that, I'd like the books to be portable without a lot of effort. This is where I remembered reading an interesting little book from Christopher Schwartz's Lost Art Press, and it's this one, The Joiner and Cabinet Maker. Now this book is basically the story of an apprentice, Thomas. Now the first complete job that Thomas is trusted with is to make a packing box for Mr. Green's books. This is the original drawing in the book, and this is Christopher Schwartz's finished version. So I thought I could make a few of those, but I'm in a chicken and egg situation here. See, my workshop needs sorting out before I can hope to tackle anything like that. And although the books would be well protected and immediately portable, I'm back to the same visibility and accessibility issues I had with the cardboard boxes. But the portability of the packing box led me to another of Chris's books. This is it. It's called Campaign Furniture, and it's also published by Lost Art Press. I bought this one in May 2014. On page 148 there's this. It's a travelling bookcase. Now, an army officer would simply open the case and his boots would be right there. No need to unpack at all. Then, when he had to move, he simply shut the case and went. Now again, I'm not going to build this. I mean, who's got the time? But the concept of a travelling case where the packing boxes are also the bookcase, that's what interests me. So this is my idea to try and address all of the issues I've been talking about so far. This is a 35 litre box from the Really Useful Box Company. This particular size of box is just perfect for all my books in all their sizes. And with the lid on, the books are as protected as possible from dirt and especially moisture, and the box is immediately portable. But what about accessibility and visibility? Well, if I stack them on the floor like this, I'm basically back to square one. Accessibility is rubbish with all but the topmost box, and although I can see okay through the translucent plastic lid, again that's only easy with the top box. Now if I orient the box like this, now it looks like a little bookcase. But the question is, can I stack them like this? Well, first of all, I don't really want to stack them because the whole point is to try and free up floor space, and if I do stack them I might get the mould issue underneath as well. And anyway, as you can see, it's not very stable and access is still just as clumsy. So then I thought, what about setting them in a row on a long shelf? If I do that, the lids would overhang like this, so I would have good visibility, and I can easily take a lid off, so I've got good accessibility. And they're off the floor, so that's liberated floor space, and mould isn't an issue. But I've taken a strong dislike to shelves. I had a whole rack of them here before, and I hated them. As far as I'm concerned, they're just junk magnets, and I don't want them back if I can possibly help it. So I'm going to mount these boxes directly onto the wall, right along here under the electrical conduit. But how am I going to do that? I could screw through the plastic base right into the plywood wall, but I don't think that would be robust enough. And anyway, if I wanted to move the books, I would have to take them all out to unscrew the box and then put them all back in to do the move. And that's just rubbish portability. So no, the solution has to be outside the box. These areas on the outer structure look interesting. I think I can make some kind of a bracket system which would engage like this, and then I would only need a simple support batten underneath to take the weight. I need to do a little bit of designing, and that means first capturing some dimensions. So to do that, I've set the box up in the working position, and I'm going to focus in on this top right corner first of all. This is a prototype of the bracket that I'm going to be using, and as you can see, it works by fitting over the two fins that are on each corner of the box, and then it's screwed into a wooden batten which is itself screwed onto the wall. I use an app called Freeform that comes with the iPad, and initially I just do a rough sketch just to capture the numbers. Then I take the time to produce a scale drawing like this. The advantage of this is that it's a good way of checking for errors. Another thing you can do is you can group together all these lines, shapes, numbers and words to create objects. And once you've done that, you can see if things fit together. Like in this case, I've drawn a scale version of the bracket and I'm seeing if it fits into the veins on the box corner. After capturing all the numbers I need, I can make this scale drawing. This is a view of the box, the blue object, from above. The green objects are the brackets and the brown object at the top is a scale drawing of a story stick. Once I've made the story stick, I can accurately mark the position of each bracket all along the wooden rail. Now a story stick can be made from anything, and traditionally it was just a piece of wood, but I like to use a rule because the markings are already there and it makes transferring the marks to the work just a little bit easier. Here I've got a 600mm ruler and I begin by sticking on a strip of masking tape. This gives me something to write on without spoiling the ruler. Now I can mark out. I use a pencil on this tape because it writes better than a biro. But it wasn't till I was editing this clip that I realised I'd made a mistake. This mark is at 89mm but should be at 99. Well, this is definitely a mistake. And I'm thinking, well, suppose there has to be a first time for everything. And I know why it happened. The reason it happened is because shut up, that's why. To quote Blondie Hacks. Hope she doesn't mind. Of course I corrected it before using the stick, but it will be wrong for the rest of this sequence of clips. I use a marker pen to annotate everything. I trim the excess tape to make it obvious which end is which. I mean, I don't want to make a mistake or anything. Now you can see a line labelled end. Once I've made a mark on the rail at that line, I'll align the other end of the story stick at that mark on the rail, and then continue to mark up for each subsequent box. But the main thing here is that the bracket locations are obvious. Okay, so now we have the means to accurately mark the positions of each bracket, but we still don't know if the system will actually work yet. So we need to do a test, and that means making the brackets. Now I couldn't find any ready-made angle brackets of a size I needed anywhere, and of course it is actually a lot simpler to make what you need, and the benefit is that they're exactly the right size. So I'm going to make some. I'm using this aluminium right angle strip. I need to make 12 brackets, and they are quite straightforward to make, but it's important to set up securely like this. Taking the time to secure the work tightly is so worth it to reduce vibration whilst cutting. Vibration not only wastes energy, but it reduces accuracy, quality and sanity. I make a mark at 51mm and use the saddle square to extend the lines. I like using this Sharpie to mark out on metal because the thickness of the line is close to the kerf of the blade. I just find it easier to cut straight. I'm beginning with a few light, careful cuts just to get the blade started, and notice I'm keeping the blade quite flat to the work. Also, you want a blade with as many teeth per inch as possible. This one has 30, and that's so at least 3 or 4 teeth are in the work at any one time. When you get to the corner, drop the handle so that the blade proceeds down the next face. This keeps the teeth cutting downhill. You can keep going like that, but it is a bit clumsy. I prefer to take the time to change the orientation of the work. As you approach the end of the cut, just lighten up a bit to avoid jamming the blade. This is an extra coarse diamond file, and all I'm doing here is making sure that the sawn edges are not too rough. Also, I'm easing all the corners and points and deburring the edges. Now I can drill some holes for screws. To speed up marking out for those, I'm using my prototype bracket as a jig. I want to use 4mm screws, so I need 4mm clearance holes. Now to make those, I'm starting off with a 3mm pilot hole. Then I enlarge it to 4mm with a sheet metal step drill bit. This gives a nice round hole with a really smooth chamfered rim. The final step is to clean up the burr on the other side with the conical deburring tool. That turned out well. Now I'll just make another 11. This is the actual 3 metre long top rail that I'm going to be using. I'm going to do my testing directly on it because if the test works, I can just carry on with the rest of the brackets and I've saved a step. If the test doesn't work, well, I can just turn it over and try again. This is where the story stick earns its keep. I set the letter S on the end. This is to inset the first box a bit so that all the boxes end up equally spaced on the rail. Then I can just mark the bracket locations and the position of end, and then I'll extend the marks with a saddle square. The point of the test is to find the best position for the brackets, so for this first attempt I'm setting the brackets exactly 35mm from the back. I'm hoping this will hold the box with as little play as possible. I've turned the rail by 90 degrees and clamped it. Now this little piece is exactly 35mm wide and I'm going to use it to jig the brackets. So I've transferred the bracket layout lines and it'll work like this. I'm using a little dab of fast grab glue here. This is just where the brackets sit. I think it's worth doing this. It holds the brackets precisely and securely in place so that they don't move later during drilling and screwdriving. And anyway, you can just go and have a cup of tea whilst the glue goes off. With the glue firm enough, I can turn the rail 90 degrees back again and clamp up for screwdriving. Centre punch first. Then I can drive in the 4mm by 35mm screws. With the top rail clamped in the working position, the bench upper surface represents the wall. So now we can begin testing, and first of all I'll just do a gross error check. This is just to make sure that the brackets are in the right location. Of course, there has to be a lower rail to take most of the weight of the box, and I need to get the spacing between the two rails just right. So this spare piece represents the lower support rail. If I put it tight against the box like this, then as I rotate the box to get it out, the test piece should be pushed away just enough to free the box. As you can see, it hardly moves at all. Now if I leave it that tight, there's a possibility of some binding at some point in the future. I mean, everything's made of wood in this workshop, and I think it's always best to have a little bit of clearance anyway. So I'm going to clamp the spare piece in position now, but I'm using the story stick as a shim. Before I measure the gap between the top rail and my test bottom rail, I'm just going to try fitting a full heavy box just to be sure. So far so good, that all seems firm enough, and there's no sign of any give in the brackets. Now that I'm happy with the positioning of the upper and lower rails, I can measure the gap between them, and that'll be the spacing required between the two rails when they're mounted on the wall, and I'll make a spacer so that I can achieve that when I come to fix the rails to the wall. So it looks like it's 366mm and a bit at that end, and exactly the same at this end. So we'll call that 366mm minimum. There's one final test I need to do, and that's a strength test with everything set as if mounted on the wall. So to the right I've set up a test lower rail, and that's got a piece at the back to simulate the wall. So now I can set up a full box in working position and test the brackets. Well, the system works, and the brackets are holding firmly. I'm not detecting any give at all. So those brackets can stay on, and I've saved a step there, and I can now carry on with mounting the other brackets and get the whole lot onto the wall. This is me marking up for the rest of the brackets. This time I put the end of the story stick on the end mark of the previous set. Then I just mark the two bracket positions and the next end mark, and then I just repeat the process. Now I'm using the saddle square and the black marker pen just to make my marks a bit more visible. This is all my marking up finished now. I've put some hash marks at the bracket locations just to make them more conspicuous. Now at the very end, the last mark is at the F mark, not the end mark. Combined with the inset we did for the first set, that was at mark S, this means that all 6 boxes will be evenly spaced. Well, that's all the brackets installed, so now I can think about just how I'm going to install these rails on the wall. First of all, I've made this mark in the centre of the rail. Then I make 2 marks 20mm away from that and extend them across the front face, and then make centre point marks 25mm down from the top edge. Then I drill two 5mm clearance holes with countersink. This is the wall where I'm hanging the rails. Under the roof light there's two panels, each 12-20mm wide. Behind the panels there's a 50mm wide stud marked with green tape every 600mm or so, and it's into those I want to put my screws. Now I built these walls in separate panels and then butted them all together, and where they join I can get two screws side by side. But first I'll hang the rail around this centre line. I put one screw in one of the holes nearest the balance point. Now I can easily hold up the rail with one hand and screw drive with the other. These are 5x80 screws. Now it's dead easy to mark where the studs are. Having done that, I can take this top rail down again so that I can mark up and drill the rest of the holes. Also, I've made a mark at the middle of the bottom rail so that I can align that with the middle mark on the top rail. Once they're ganged up, now I can transfer all the marks. I transferred all the lines to the correct face and marked to drill centre points. So now with both rails securely clamped, I can drill all the holes. Putting the top rail back up was a little bit fiddly, getting that screw to go back into the hole it came out of, but once it's set up I can set up my laser and align it with the lower edge of the top rail. This makes it dead easy to make sure that the right end is level. And now with the lights back on I can carefully drive home some screws, just being careful not to budge it. I do the same at the other end. Both ends securely fastened, I know the rail is level enough so I can just zip through all the other screws. I finish up at the ends with a 60mm screw. This is just going into 12mm plywood, no stud, so that's all it needs. It's really just to keep the end tight. Well, that's the top rail done at last, and it does feel really secure on that wall. The only thing is that it doesn't actually look level when sighted against the conduit and the trim above it. And I tested the trim, and yeah, it has moved a bit over the years, it isn't level, but the roof light trim is still level, so it is the trim that's wonky. The workshop isn't sinking or anything, although I wouldn't be surprised if it was, the amount of groundwater around here. Now I need to make that spacer so that I can fit the lower rail. This is a piece of scrap oak from a kitchen worktop. I've very precisely made a mark at 360mm, and the reason I did that was because I just did, right? Now I've made the correct mark at 365mm, and I'm going to square the lines across. Now this isn't the 366mm that we measured earlier. Now I haven't made a mistake, as if, but you'll see why I've taken off that millimetre shortly. This is my Skelton cross-cut tenon saw. I've not had that out for ages. The wall needs a bit of prep. I'm lining up both rails vertically using the middle marks I made on them. To help with that, I used a laser to make some alignment marks on the wall. Now, is it necessary to be this accurate? Of course. What other way is there? This is the fiddly bit, or it would be if I hadn't given myself an unfair advantage by working from the centre. I can easily hold the rail with my left hand because it's balanced, and then I can do everything else with my right hand. Now notice I've placed the storage stick on the rail. That's going to be a 1mm shim. Remember that lost millimetre? So I can push up under the rail as tight as I can, make sure my middle marks are aligned, and then I can just drive a screw in. It doesn't matter if one end drops a bit, we can just pull it up later. Now then, I can just pull away the shim and the spacer drops out. No chance of a jam. Of course, I deserve a dram for coming up with that idea. Anyway, it's coming up with these wee process details that makes a job go more smoothly. Now it's just a matter of repeating the process at each end and in between to get two perfectly spaced rails. Well, that's the job done. Now I can test the fit with an empty box. Well, thank goodness that works, and it feels really solid and firm too. I'll just try it in each box position just to make sure that the fit is good all along. Now for the real test, trying it with a full box. This box of books weighs about 20 kilos, and part of this test is, of course, can I lift it up and engage with the brackets? It seems that I can. I put another box up to check the spacing between the two. This is important because I need to be able to take off a lid without any restriction. Well, I'm really pleased with this. It's turned out exactly the way I wanted it to. There's still plenty of space on the wall underneath, but I've finally got all my books protected from dust, dirt and damp, and there's better visibility for easier browsing. There's better accessibility, and when I need to, easy portability. Well friends, I hope you agree that this is a useful workshop storage solution. It's certainly an unusual use of these boxes from the Really Useful Box Company, but now of course I'm wondering how I can expand this system for things other than books. And of course there is plenty of different sized boxes available, and not just from the Really Useful Box Company. Anyway, I've really enjoyed doing this, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Mr. Lynn's Workshop.